I am very excited to introduce our two speakers today, Katrin Heitmann and Giuseppe Serati. And we will first hear from Dr. Heitmann. So, brief introduction for Dr. Heitmann. Katrin Heitmann is the Deputy Division Director for the High Energy Physics Division at Argonne National Laboratory, where she is a physicist and a computational scientist. She is also a senior member of the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics at UChicago and a member of the Northwestern Argonne Institute of Science and Engineering. Before joining Argonne, Katrin was a staff member at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Her research focuses on computational cosmology, in particular on trying to understand the causes for the accelerated expansion of the universe. She is responsible for large simulation campaigns with HACC and for the tools in the associated analysis library, CosmoTools. Katrin is a member of several major astrophysical surveys that aim to shed light on this question and is currently the spokesperson for the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, LSST, Dark Energy Science Collaboration. Dr. Heitmann completed her PhD in physics at Dortmund University. Needless to say, we are incredibly lucky to have her joining us today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Heitmann to the virtual Summer Lab stage. All right.
I'm always losing my mouse when I start playing this thing, sorry. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I will run you through cosmology. It's a big field, so if I'm going too fast, feel even free to interrupt me in the middle, because I can adjust a little bit what I'm not going to talk about, so just feel free to ask questions. I will talk a little bit to you about the dark universe, what we're after in cosmology. I will talk about the hack story. So HACC is actually hack, and it really describes our code quite nicely. Management always says HACC because they say hack doesn't sound serious enough, but it is what the code's name is. And a tiny bit at the end, if I have time, about the hack science that we do. I have to thank all my collaborators first, and I know you guys are from the computational side. And so the one nice thing here is that we have contributors from physics, from statistics, and from computer science. So we have really a great team that works together, and it's a lot of fun. How do we do cosmology? So the one thing that is interesting or different about cosmology from physics in general is that we can't do easily experiments in the lab. So usually when you do physics, what you want to do is the best case scenario is you set up an experiment and really interrogate the thing that you are after. And in cosmology, what we do instead is we observe the universe in different wavebands, and we're making maps. And then we take these maps, like, for example, we observe a lot of galaxies on the sky with a big telescope, and then we measure statistics of these maps. We measure how things are distributed in the universe, and that actually tells us something about the evolution of the universe, the makeup of the universe, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. The one thing that you need to do in that case is to actually run very large simulations that gives you predictions for these statistical measurements that you want to do. So you have a prediction, you compare it to the maps that you observe, and then hopefully you can learn something. So large-scale computing is very, very important for us, and it's becoming ever more important because the data is becoming better and better. And so this is just an observation from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which mapped more than 1 million galaxies with redshift, where redshift is distances in a 3-dimensional map. And so the black parts are where there were no observations. So everything that's purplish is where they measured galaxies. And you see this sea of galaxies. And we zoom in here to two that are in the merging process. If you have something that has a cross in it, it's a star. And so basically what we want to do in computational cosmology, we want to get as close as possible to simulate something like these galaxies, but at the same time also to simulate the sea of galaxies that you saw at the start. So what have we learned so far? So the content of the universe, it's really dark. So what you see here is an image of an iceberg. And basically what we do is 5% of the matter in the universe is actually visible, and 0.5% is in stars. And we try to extract information from this relatively small amount of matter that we can observe to really learn about the full universe. So the biggest component in the matter energy content in the universe is something that we call dark energy. And we actually have no real clue what this is. It was observed by looking at exploding stars, at supernovae, and measuring how fast they move away from us. And so it was discovered that the universe is actually expanding faster than we expected. So there's an accelerated expansion. And again, we have no idea what the reason for that is. So imagine you throw a ball in the air, and instead of it coming down, it flies upwards faster and faster. That is kind of what we saw. And Nobel Prize was awarded for this in 2011, but we are still trying to figure out what is the reason for it. So being totally ignorant, what we are trying mostly right now is making more observations, as I said, making more maps, making better maps, more detailed maps, and really trying to come up with an explanation. Another big component is dark matter. 27% of the universe is in what we call dark matter, and we call it dark matter because it doesn't emit or absorb light. So far we have only observed it indirectly, so we can see that the light is curved, is bent when it tries to come through a big dark matter clump. And again, what we want to do is we want to characterize the nature of dark matter, detect the actual dark matter particles. There are big experiments going on to do that. So there's a lot of stuff that we know it exists, but we don't understand the origin. So it's pretty exciting. The other piece that we know is we have a pretty solid understanding of how structure formed. So here on the right, you see kind of like a timeline. On the left, I'm showing you the simulations that we will get to in a minute. The simulations start roughly 50 million after the universe, after the Big Bang, and then we evolve it forward. So we have a good idea from measurements from the so-called cosmic microwave background, how the initial perturbations in the universe were distributed and generated. And so these initial perturbations, what happens to them, they're amplified by gravitational instabilities. So matter starts clumping up. And then you can actually see how structure forms later on. So we'll get into this in a little bit more detail. So as I said, what we want to do is we want to put this all onto a computer. And this is really like, I could give you like a whole morning of lectures about how we do this. But basically what you should take away from this is that what we are trying to do is we are trying to use particles in the simulation. So these are particle-based simulations. They are tracers of the dark matter in the universe. So it's not the dark matter particle, but it's a big clump of dark matter stuff. It's like 10 to the 9 solar masses heavy if you have a high resolution simulation. And then we say we want to see how they interact gravitationally. So that's the simplest assumption that you can make. And we want to see what happens next. So on the right here, you see the equations of motions for these tracer particles. The expansion in the universe is included in this scale factor 8. And then in the second equation, you see that there is something called omega total. So this omega total encapsulates what I told you about the content of the universe. It has a dark matter, it has baryons, you and me are made out of baryons, and it has a dark energy component. So we can put this all together on a computer, on a supercomputer, and evolve it forward. And we'll get to that in a second, how that then looks like. And what I always like to quote, this is from Bob Dickey in 1969, where he said the universe is far too complicated a structure to be studied deductively, starting from initial conditions and solving the equations of motions. But this is exactly what we do today. So supercomputers have become big enough, fast enough to actually allow us to do this. So this is pretty exciting. So I know I'm talking very fast, and you can also send me emails afterwards. I should have put my email somewhere. It's my last name at anl.gov if you have more questions. So how do we go forward now? We know the constituents, we know the initial conditions, at least statistically. We know the dynamical rules, and we are at Argonne, so we have a big supercomputer. So that's nice. So we put that all together and we run a simulation. So what you see here before I start this is a little piece of the universe. And you see that everything is very smooth. We are at very early times, 50 million years roughly after the Big Bang. And what you can't see here, because it is so smooth, is that there are tiny, tiny little perturbations in here. And these perturbations will start to grow. And you will see that in a second. So Z is our time in cosmology. So we are running now forwards to today. And so you see that structures are forming. So you see how these particles start to clump together. And this is what we then want to measure. So here we stop right now, we just rotate a little bit around, and you see all these clumps here. So these are dark matter clumps that have formed, and in these clumps, galaxies will form. And that is what we will then compare to the observations that we take with the very, very large telescopes. And just measuring how many clumps there are, how many, how they are distributed spatially, that gives us a lot of information. So now what can I do? So what I can do is, being the simulation person and the theorist, I can say I want to change the ingredients a little bit. I want to, like, somebody tells me dark energy doesn't exist, so I take it out. And what you see here is on the left, the standard model of cosmology that I described at the start. In the middle, you see I take it out. I take out the dark energy, and on the right, you see a specific model of dark matter where I say I change a little bit what the dark matter what the dark matter is itself. So I give it a little bit of a temperature. And you see that these structures are different. So now I can go in again, I can ask how many of these clumps have formed, how are they distributed, and how does that tell me something when I compare it to the observation. So that's pretty nice. The one thing that I'm talking about right now is the dark matter. And but what we are observing is the galaxies. I told you at the very start, we are observing the stars and the galaxies in the universe, this little piece of the iceberg. And we have to connect that now. So we have to come up with a theory that tells us how we connect the dark matter with the galaxies. And a lot of people have worked on this quite a bit. And what you see here on the upper part is, on the right, you see a telescope, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. Then you see the map that the Sloan Digital Sky Survey is actually measuring. So you see the galaxies there, so you can measure their distribution. In the middle, you see this plot where the black points are actually the distribution. So you just measure their spatial distribution. And the black points are the measurements from SDSS. And then on the left, what you do is you run the simulation, you generate your dark matter distribution. You come up with a rule how the dark matter is connected to the galaxies. And you plug that in and you compare it to your data, and you find it actually works out quite nicely. So this, again, it's very simplified, but it kind of gives you an idea how you can connect the theory to the data and then learn something. And what is pretty interesting is that at the beginning, it was mentioned that I'm currently the spokesperson of the LSST desk. And so here's just a comparison. So SDSS was done quite a while ago, and this will be the improvement that we will get with LSST. So you can see that we have many, many more galaxies, many smaller galaxies are being measured, dimmer galaxies, I should say. And so there will be a lot of more information. And anybody who is here right now, so LSST will start in 2024. So it's a great opportunity for you to get involved in this really, really exciting project. Now, a little bit more about the HACK story. So as I said, HACK is the code that we use to run on very large supercomputers to simulate the distribution of matter in the universe. And the HACK story started actually in Los Alamos. So what you see here is Roadrunner, which was a supercomputer in 2008, the fastest in the world. And I was there too in Los Alamos at that time. And it was actually kind of interesting. So we got an email from Andy White, who was at the time the lead of the supercomputing effort at Los Alamos. And he said, we will have this new machine called Roadrunner, and it will be the first machine to achieve a petaflop. So right now, Argonne is hoping to have next year a machine that will reach the exaflop scale. So you can see a little bit of a time scale here. And the challenge was that this machine was actually a crazy architecture. So it was not just CPUs straight up, but it actually had accelerators. And these accelerators, they were cell accelerators. They required major code redesign and rewrites. And so the question was, were there people who will be willing to actually do that and take this challenge to run on the fastest machine in the world, but probably have to write completely new code for this. So what we actually ended up doing, we were saying, yes, it's such a great opportunity for us, so we want to do this, but we want to develop a code that is actually portable. So we don't want to just develop it for Roadrunner and then Roadrunner is gone after 2 years and then we are there with nothing. So we actually thought about this really, really hard. And for some reason, my slides are stuck now. That is that. Let's try to escape. And then we try to play again. Ah, right. And okay, so every morning I read, as you have probably figured out by now, my accent is German, and I read this newspaper, and it was the first time in my life that I could actually point my mother to a newspaper article that she would understand that what I'm working on. And so Roadrunner was mentioned in the Süddeutsche, and cosmology was mentioned. So you see here the German word for cosmology is the same, just with a K. And it leads by example technology of the future. So I was really, really excited that I had this opportunity to work on this machine. And so we started thinking, how do we program for this machine? Crazy architecture, how can we use it? That is what the computational scientist thinks. The computer scientist is very excited, future exascale hybrid machines. So we started like, okay, what do we do? And here's the Roadrunner architecture. Even though it doesn't exist anymore, I just want to point it out to you, because if you are in the field of computational science or computer science and you are confronted with a new architecture, you have to think really, really hard about it. And this new architecture is actually quite similar to what the exascale machines will look like. It's just not the cell accelerator, but the GPU accelerator. And so what you see here is actually on the upper part is the CPU piece. And then these slightly small pinky guys, they are the cell accelerator. So similar to GPUs, just a different architecture. And so what we had to think about was the opterons had a lot of the memory in the system, but the cells had the compute. 95% of the compute is in the cells. So we had to come up with a way of how we could architect hack to take advantage of this machine. And so these are just the challenges. So opterons have half of the machine's memory, but are very small. The cells have the other half of the memory, very fast, but you can't directly communicate between cells, just like now with the GPUs. So what we wanted was a distributed memory requirements. We wanted to have the cells a lot of work to do, just like you want now. The GPUs have a lot of work to do. And the code was supposed to be easily ported to other architectures, because we kind of knew that the cell architecture would not survive. And this is hack in a nutshell. And so this is more for the people who are interested in code architecture. So what we did was we split up the code in a long range and a short range solver. And so the short range solver lives on the cells and does all the work for us. And the long range solver lives on the CPUs and does very big fast Fourier transforms. And so we designed this code, and the idea was that the short range solver should be something that is very, very easily programmable. So if we have a new machine, we can take it out and replace it by something else. So for GPUs, for example, we can replace this by CUDA code. And so this was like a really exciting day in my life. So as you can imagine, so I was a young staff member. I had the opportunity to work on the fastest supercomputer in the world. And I was really excited. And you see here that actually on September 24th in 2008, I was running on 99.77% of the machine. It crashed pretty quickly afterwards, but nevertheless, it was really great. You see me there. It's not really me, but you see me there on the phone, because actually the computer was behind what is called the fence at Los Alamos. It was a machine that would be classified later on, and I was talking to the operators on the phone at that day. So it was quite exciting. We got the code to run. So you see here some scaling plots. I don't want to go into this in detail. On the lower left, you see a plot which shows you the improvement of the short range solver. So the blue and black line are the opterons, and the red line is the improvement of timing of the cells. So you see that we got a huge improvement, orders of magnitude in timing. So it really was worth all the work that we put in. And I should make sure that I'm not. So then the hack story continues, and actually not only hack, but also me personally moved to Argonne. So at Argonne, Mira was installed in 2011, 2012. And Mira was a completely different architecture. So there were no accelerators on Mira. Instead, Mira had lots and lots and lots of cores. So then we had to think about, okay, we did think like, how do we architect our code that we can port it to a new machine? And this was the very first challenge that we had. And what we did was we took out the short range solver that lived on the cells and replaced it with another algorithm. So what was nice about that was that the short range solver was actually only 5% of the code infrastructure. So it was not so hard. We optimized it a lot. And we actually got a code out of this that then worked on Mira really beautifully. I don't have time to explain this in more detail, but it kind of gives you the idea that the one thing in high performance computing is what you will see is that architectures change a lot underneath you. And if you write code, make sure that you keep that in mind. And then the next machine we had, and again, it was the fastest machine in the world at the time, was Titan at Oak Ridge. And Titan was a GPU accelerated machine. So we went back to our cell code that we had developed for Roadrunner, replaced the cell part by a CUDA written part, and again, got really, really good performance on this machine. Then next, Intel invented the Knights Landing line of architectures. Knights Landing were again much more like Mira. So it was, again, you had lots and lots of cores. None of these cores was very fast. Theta was one at Argonne, which was the same architecture. So we had to switch again back and go back to the Mira design of our code and implement things there. And what we did when we went to the KNL architecture, we also decided we wanted to add new physics. So instead of just having the gravity part, which I showed you in the previous slide, we also wanted to add the baryons, so the stuff that you and me are made of. And so we added that. We wrote a new code, or we extended our code. It's now called CRAC, CRK hack, and it has this additional physics. And just to show you a little movie, here is what you see here is actually the baryonic temperature. So you still have the dark matter, but inside the dark matter embedded is now the baryons. And so this will allow you to also, in the end, if you have high enough resolution, to get the simulations to show you the galaxies on the sky. We are still a little bit far away from that. So right now what people are doing is simulating one galaxy at a time, but we wanted to have all these, we want to have all the galaxies inside the big, large cosmological volume. And then the machine we are running on right now is Summit at Oak Ridge. And Summit is again a GPU code. So we were very happy that we could just take our code that we had developed for the previous Oak Ridge machine and go from there for Titan. So what I told you, like in 5 minutes, really, really speedily fast, is how we went from 2008, from this 1 petaflop machine that we had at Los Alamos to a 200 petaflop plus machine in 2018. So in a decade, we had this increase of 200x in performance. And our code was written in a way that it was is written in a way that is flexible enough to go in between. And so now for 2021, we will have another increase of a factor of 5 if all goes well. And at Argonne and Oak Ridge, we hopefully will have the first exascale machines. Hack in pictures, just for a little bit of fun. So we won the Directors Award together with the Mira ALCF team for stress testing the machine. So that's one interesting thing. If you have ever the opportunity to run on one of these fast machines very, very early on, you'll find problems, but it's also fun to see how to solve them. There's something called the Gordon Bell Prize that is given out to high performance code. So we got 2 times into the finals. And so here you see how we are sitting together in this room, preparing for a paper that describes this. And then for all the women in the audience, what I would like to point out, this is a picture down below of Gordon Bell and all the previous finalists. And I'm in there, and I'm the only woman in there. And I'm always saying when I show this picture that I want to change this. There should be many, many more women. And I think that's very important for the field. Okay, so here we have a little movie. I didn't tell you that, but our original code that I started working on when I was a postdoc very early on in Los Alamos, which was actually written in a high performance Fortran, was called MC2. So MC2 was a nice little code, easy to work with, but also not very flexible. And then we developed Hack, and Hack is now this more fast code that runs on all these different architectures, and which had a much bigger team, or has a much bigger development team around it. And do I have like 3 more minutes, roughly? Okay, great. Then I can also tell you a little bit more about the Hack science. So I told you at the start a little bit about the fundamental physics questions that we can answer. So we can change the physics that we put into the code and then see how the observational predictions that we can get change underneath. So that's really nice. So you feel as a theorist like, I can make my own universe and I can see what happens to it. It also allows you to cook up new probes to understand the universe. You can say, like, what if I not just only count the galaxies, but count the groups of galaxies? So you can do all kinds of experiments now that you have this simulation that is kind of like a universe in the lab. And you can do survey science. And I'm going to talk about that for a couple of minutes here. So, oh, and I should change the slide actually. So the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope is actually not called anymore Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. It's now the Rubin Observatory. And the survey that we are doing is the legacy survey of space and time. So every time something that is in astronomy getting to a stage where it becomes real, it gets often a name of a person. So Vera Rubin is a very famous astronomer, and so the observatory is now called after her. So Large Synoptic Survey Telescope was when it was proposed to the funding agencies. It has a big mirror, 8.4 meters, and it will observe 37 billion stars and galaxies over 10 years. I said at the start at some point that, and I should update that here as well, that first science data due to COVID, everything got a little bit delayed. So now they are thinking it's 2023, 2024. And the Dark Energy Science collaboration is generating simulations as close to the real data as possible for the survey. And I have the fortune to be for 2 years the LSST desk spokesperson. So desk has more than 1,000 members from across the world, so that's really nice. Anybody who is in the US, because this is a US sponsored observatory, can become a desk member. So that's also very nice. So if you're interested, you're very welcome. This is what the LSST survey will look like. So this red part here, what you see is, so the telescope is in Chile. So it will observe the southern part of the sky. And you see these little blue dots in the image. And those are fields where they stare for much, much longer. So they will cover the whole sky, but some areas they will just look at much, much, much deeper. So these are the so-called deep drilling fields. There will be alerts released every night. So if a supernova, for example, goes up, you get an alert to your phone and you can point your telescope. If you have your own telescope, you can point it there, follow up. And so it's very exciting. And as I said, it will be going on for at least 10 years. And the Dark Energy Science collaboration has formed to investigate dark energy with the survey. What we have done is we actually simulated a piece of the survey, 300 square degrees, which you see now in this green little square here. And we try to get as close to the real data as possible with this. I can show you, this is a picture of the camera. And when we did the simulation, when I say as close as possible, what we did was we included all kinds of things. We included the telescope itself. We included the CCDs in these simulations. We included the atmosphere. Like if you look up in the sky, unfortunately, there's an atmosphere between us and the galaxies. So we included all of this and added this to the simulations. And this just gives you an idea of how the simulations that came out of this. So we started with one of these simulations that I showed you at the very, very start. It was done on Mira. We put in galaxies. As I said, like on slide 3, you just look where the dark matter clumps are, you put in galaxies. And then for each galaxy, we actually simulated an image. So we had an image simulation code. And then, as I said, this image simulation code had a lot of the telescope and atmosphere and everything in there. And so what you see here, so remember, so this was the CCD that you saw in the upper right here with these small different triangles, and they're pointing to my screen. Of course, you can't see that, but you can see that the same structure is here on the left in this picture. So you can really see we were able to simulate something that looks like the real data. And if you put it all together, this is how the simulation looks like. So we have lots of galaxies, we have stars, we have all kinds of stuff in this simulation. And a large community is looking at this simulated data now and trying to understand it in more detail and see how it relates to the real universe. And I'm sorry that I spoke so fast, but there's so many things, and I'm really excited, as you can tell. And again, we have time for questions, hopefully today, but you can also always send me email if you want. I'm always very happy to discuss this. And the very last thing I want to say is that The one thing that we really like in our group to do a lot is having people who are both post-bacs, so between undergrad and grad school, spend a year with us, because a year is a good time to actually do some really cute project. So usually a paper comes out of that. It helps you with your grad school applications. And cosmology is, even though there's a lot of stuff going on, it's something where you can get plugged in very, very quickly, and everybody is very friendly, very happy. And so our team is always happy to have new students join us. Thank you. And let me stop sharing actually so that I can see the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vielen Dank, Katrin, for this wonderful talk. This was such a great window into the science that goes on at Argonne. And to make sure that we have plenty of time to kind of flip over to a different city in Illinois, to our friends at Fermi Lab, I'm going to briefly introduce our next speaker, Giuseppe Serati. Share this. There we go. All right, so our next speaker is Giuseppe Serati, who is an associate scientist at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, aka Fermi Lab. His scientific research focuses on the search for new physics in neutrino oscillation experiments. As a member of the Microboon and Icarus collaborations, he specifically is interested in searching for sterile neutrinos, as well as developing techniques for reconstructing and analyzing liquid argon time project chambers, or LART TPC data. I'm going to screw up a lot of these abbreviations. He is also a member of the DUNE collaboration and has previously contributed to research towards the Higgs boson discovery, SUSY searches, and standard model measurements. His current research, including the EXTRACT project, which develops graph neural networks for the reconstruction of particle trajectories, aims to leverage modern computing techniques to improve the speed and accuracy of event reconstruction algorithms and high energy physics data processing. Giuseppe is a new mentor in Summer Lab this year on the EXTRACT project, and we are so delighted to have him as part of this program and here to speak with us today. So welcome, Giuseppe.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for this great program. We're really enjoying working with you guys. So let me share my slides and go full screen. Yeah, so thanks again. So I will try to do something similar to what Katrin has done. I don't know if I will succeed in getting close to her great job, but I'll give sort of the Fermi Lab perspective. And so about me, I guess the only thing I can add is that I'm originally from Italy. So I did my PhD in Milan, but I guess for everything else in this slide was already covered by the nice introduction from Katie. So, and I want to talk about me. It's actually about us at Fermi Lab. So Fermi Lab calls itself the America's Particle Physics and Accelerator Laboratory. So we have a specific mission which is tied to fundamental science, to particle physics. And as a physicist, we perform experiments. And for instance, I'll talk about DUNE later on. So this is the next big experiment that we are going to work on, is being built right now. But to enable these experiments, we need to develop technology in the accelerator domain, because we need to produce these particle beams, and we need accelerator to make them powerful and precise. But we also need to work on detectors that perform the measurements, but also on computing, which is something that I work on, to process the data and store it in a very fast and efficient way. And out of these come the science, but also emerging technologies that can be used across science fields, but also in society. So, yeah, what do we do in particle physics, which we also call high energy physics, or HEP? So we split ourselves typically in three frontiers. The energy frontier, where it's called energy because we typically smash high energy particle beams, like at the LHC at CERN in Switzerland, where there are these proton beams that collide, and the energy that is produced in these collisions give rise to new particles that we study. So that's the energy frontier. the intensity frontier, we still typically start from beams. They need to be very intense because we study rare phenomena such as neutrino interaction, but also other type of physics. And the third frontier is the cosmic frontier, and you just heard beautifully from Katrin about it, so I will not even try to compete. But so each one of these frontier has its own domain, its own type of experiment, its own type of computing, but they all ultimately converge into trying to address questions about the origin of the universe and what is made of. I think this is a very fascinating journey that we are making. So I will give you just a few highlights of some recent results from the energy and the intensity frontier. So we, as was mentioned, so the last great discovery in the energy frontier was the Higgs boson in 2012. The Higgs boson is what explains this origin of mass. So explains or maybe describes how particles acquire mass by interacting with this Higgs boson. And this plot shows the coupling, so the relationship between particles with different masses and the Higgs boson, and you see that they follow this trend as predicted by theory. But we added one last item recently. So this year, the muons were added to this plot. So this means, so this is a very small number in terms of coupling because it's a small mass, and so we are entering a new regime of precision physics for the Higgs boson, and we also use it as a tool for discovery. So that's a very important highlight. Another one, which is coming from T2K, is a neutrino experiment in Japan, and last year they made this this new measurement about properties of the neutrinos, in particular about this CP violation, which is something that tells about the asymmetry between matter and antimatter. We are made of matter, not of antimatter, and we are trying to understand how come that happened, that the universe that we see is mostly done of matter and not antimatter, that should be, in principle, could behave in exactly the same way. So if it doesn't behave in the same way, there is a violation of this symmetry, which we call CP violation. And you see that their measurement is pointing in a direction of this parameter delta CP that is away from 0. So there's a hint that there might be CP violation. As a result, that other experiments like NOVA, that is a Fermi lab experiment, are kind of not disputing, but they have different results that have a bit of tension. So we are happy that we'll need a new, more powerful experiment to tell what is going on, and that's what Dune, that I'll mention again later. And the most recent highlight is from the G-2 experiment, again at Fermi lab, that measured a property of the muon, which is called the anomalous magnetic moment. It measured at a significantly different value than what predicted by the model, and this implies that at higher energy there is some unknown source of new physics that is not modeled yet. So this is sort of indirect but clear evidence that there is something new at higher energy. And so the journey of science never ends. So there is a next stage already planned for all of these experiments. So for so this plot comes from CMS at the LHC. So the LHC is going to enter run 3 soon, but the big upgrade will be in a few years where we enter the high luminosity LHC. This means that the intensity of the beam will increase a lot by about an order of magnitude, and so we'll get much more data coming from the collisions, but at the same time the experiments are upgrading their detectors, and they're becoming, for instance, this is called high granularity calorimeter. So it's going to be much more granular than what we have now. So the cameras, so these detectors are like cameras. The cameras that we use are upgrading and are going to have many more pixels. So I think the order of the channels here is order of 10 millions. So we get much more data also from the detector itself. And so similarly, Dune is the experiment that is being is the next flagship experiment at CERN, sorry, at Fermilab. So we also upgrade the accelerator here and shoot neutrinos from Fermilab to South Dakota in a mine where we'll build these giant liquid argon detectors. There will be 4 modules of about 10 K-tons each, and again, bigger detectors and more data. And similarly for G-2, the result I showed you before is just from run 1. They already collected much more data and are planning to collect more. So the trend here is to we need more data to go to the next stage of our physics, but this comes with challenges. And the challenges is that the most naive change is that there are more bits, more data, more bits, so we need more storage. And so this is a projection of needs for the Atlas experiment again at CERN. You see a big increase in needs for disk storage, but also the processing time of the data increases. This is from CMS. You see this big step rise in the needs for CPU, but also when you get more data, then your statistical power is larger. So you are more subject to what we call the systematic uncertainties. So your statistical prediction is better, so you are more sensitive to mismodeling issues, so to what we call systematic uncertainties. So we need larger and more accurate simulation samples. So I was speaking about Dune and the CP violation that we want to measure. And so this is the sensitivity. So the vertical axis is the sensitivity. So the higher, the better. And as a function of the possible parameters for this CP violation parameter we want to measure, that is still unknown. And the variations between these curves is for different modeling of the simulation parameters. So there is a big difference that is made with more precise simulation of our parameters. And so this needs lots of work, requires lots of improvements, but from the technology and industry, many new technologies are emerging that are already changing the landscape of computing for HPE experiments. So we are actively working for improvements using so many different technologies, from supercomputers going to the exascale, as Katrin mentioned, AI and deep learning, using cloud computing, using accelerators or parallelization on CPU. And this is a nice way to show the differences between the various processors. And depending on your problem, you might be your need might be in the more efficient side or the more flexible side. And so each problem we tackle as different needs. We can use industry big data tools. We can work towards portable software and so on. So all of these are applied to our processing chain. And so I'm going just to very briefly explain what's the journey that our data makes from the detector to a paper. So this is a simplified version of what happens in reality, but we actually need 2 versions of the detector, a real one and a digital one, a simulated one, where basically all components are simulated in great detail, and the interaction from the beams are also simulated. The difference is that the detector data is so abundant that we can't really store and process all of it. So we need what we call trigger, which is an online processing and filtering of the data. So we quickly process both at hardware level, but also at software level, the data, with the goal of just throwing away what we think it's not interesting because it's already known. And what passes this step is what we think is the most interesting, and that's what we store. So this is the storage side of the picture. So, and that's what we call raw data, is the electronic signal that comes out of our detectors. But we need to turn this electronic signal into something that we can do physics with. So we need to do reconstruction and convert these low-level information into something more high-level, and that is the process I will talk about more later on, that produces a new data tier that we can filter and reformat to perform analysis and eventually publish a paper. All of these processing for our field typically happens in the worldwide grid. So it's a federation of data centers around the world that share the data and share the computing power. So at least so far, this is the computing model. But we have seen in the previous slides that there are many new technologies that we can use, and there are active projects that are trying to reshape and make all of these much more efficient for our next stage of physics results. So I will, my domain in this is reconstruction. So I will present what reconstruction is. So it's the automated process of inferring the higher level physics information from low level detector quantities. So this is element displays from microbone, which is another liquid argon time projection chamber experiment. And so this is the data, the sort of the raw data that comes out. It's a beautiful image. And so there are two axes here. There is the time axis and the wire axis. So each pixel in a vertical slice come from the same wire, but what you see is what is recorded at different times. So there is an electric field that drives the charge toward the wires. So at different times you see a different charge that is drifting towards the wires. And so you build these images. And once you have these images, you can ask yourself how many particles were produced. On the left, there is this straight track, and there is a showery track. So there are two, but those two are different. On the right, there are two tracks and two showers. Then you want to know what's their energy. So based on the length of this track, you can know what its energy is, what their species are, and you can see that this shower here is attached, so no gap to the other track, and these showers are instead detached. So this is an electron, and these are photons because they actually travel some distance before converting into electrons and positrons. That's when you start seeing the shower. So this is a beautiful image for homogeneous detector, which is this neutrino experiment. Things are more complicated for collider experiments like CMS, and because there are multiple subdetectors. So there is a tracker made of different layers. At the innermost part, there are calorimeters which absorb the energy from specific particles. Then this is a magnet, and there is another tracker that is specific for muons. So muons are these blue, pictured in blue is this line that goes through all of the detectors. So that's how you tell it's a muon. Then there are other like the hadrons that if they are charged, they go through the tracker, and then hence they deposit all their energies in the hadron calorimeter. If it's a neutral hadron, you don't see it in the tracker, but only in the calorimeter, and so on. And so what I will focus on, my story, is the silicon tracker. So this is made of several layers of silicon, and you measure the deposit from charged particles across it, and you have very precise point-like measurements of tens of micron precision. So how do we go from this cloud of measurements to tracks? And once you have the track, you have the measurement of the momentum of the energy of the particle. So we have an algorithm called Kalman filter tracking, which has been used in HP experiment for decades. It was very fine-tuned for the current experiments. It shows outstanding performance. The way it works is it's based on this simple logic unit. So you have your current knowledge of the track parameters, which is the track is a helix in the magnetic field. So you have these 5 parameters with uncertainties, and you are at a given layer, and you propagate to the next layer, and so you move from this blue to the yellow, which is a propagated state. Then here you find that there is a measurement we call heat, and so you have new information. You can update your propagated prediction and have an updated prediction of the track parameters, which is the blue, and you can repeat these. We perform this reconstruction in 3 steps. We start from these tracks called the seeds, then we do track building and track fit. Track fit is simple, it's just you have already identified what the hits are, and so you just go through this logic unit. But the building is the challenging part, because that's the stage where you assign the hits to each track. And so this is a combinatorial problem. So at a given layer, you may have 2 hits that could be belonging to that track, and you need to decide between the 2. So you need to explore both directions. Some cases there might be a missing hit. Only when you're very, very lucky, you find basically you degenerate into the fit case. And so this is a combinatorial problem. And the point is that we have hundreds of thousands of hits in our detectors. So this is what an event, this is a real event for a test run at the LHC with 130 collision vertices. And so the number of vertices called pile up here at the high luminosity LHC would be 140 to 200. So you see what a mess this is, and we need to follow each track along the way. So the combinatorial problem explodes, and the timing for track reconstruction explodes as well. But this is not something that we can just cut out, because it's crucial for the physics. So we need to make it faster and do R&D. So this is the first project I worked on for R&D in computing for HP. It's called the MKFit. So it's the first solution is basically to keep the same algorithm, but redesign it to make it efficient for the many core CPU architectures, which were dominant when we started. And so the key is to refactor the data to make it efficient for this architecture. So this features vectorization, so SIMD processing, same instruction, multiple data. We came out with a library that works for small matrices, and we find very good vectorization performance with this. Probably I don't have time to get into the details, but then we also parallelize at multi-threading level. But the real key is that when you have so much CPU power, but then what limits you is the memory bandwidth. So the point is to minimize the size of the objects that live in memory. So we want to have a lightweight description of the detector and minimize the memory operations. So that is the key to get efficient performance. That's indeed what we got. So so this is the paper we published. We can replace the standard algorithm with MKFit for building. We find a 6 times improvement in speed for a single-threaded execution due to the vectorization and the redesign of the algorithm. We also have good performance in terms of thread scaling for different architectures. So basically, we compare with the Amdahl's law, and we see that more than 95% of the code is actually effectively parallelized. And we get basically very similar particle detection efficiency as a function of the direction of the track. So we are in the 90 plus efficiency range. And so now this is moving from the R&D phase to the deployment phase, which is a very difficult. The effort doesn't end with R&D. The deployment is something that is often underestimated. Is a very important step, and hopefully we'll be ready for the next data taking period. But so the technology keeps moving, and so there are different options in terms of solution for this tracking problem. And we are looking also for something that can be more efficient on systems that are different from the many core CPUs. And if we want to go to, for instance, GPUs, AI is the go-to technology because it's powerful, can scale well. The problem to make it work is you need to cast your domain problem in a natural way, where natural means that it has to be learnable by the network. And so we employ for tracking, we employ a graph neural network. So we start from these hits, these measurements in different layers, and we build a graph connecting the hits that can be neighbors. You see all these connections. These are the edges. So we start from features in the nodes in the detector space. We can embed them into the convolution into a latent space, And then we can classify these edges with the so-called interaction network, and through message passing steps, we have a binary classification, so they tell us if the edges are true or false, and then we have another step that separates the edges from different tracks. So we are already at the level with competitive physics performance, and the scaling of time compared to the number of space points is roughly linear, which is a huge accomplishment. So the next interesting step is that once you have solutions for a given problem, like tracking at collider experiments, you can apply it to different domains. And so this can have a much more broad impact. So I now work for neutrino experiments, so for Dune and other liquid argon experiments. So the solutions that we just developed for tracking, we can apply them for needs in the neutrino world. So the vectorization and multi-threading that we learn to apply to tracking, we now use for different algorithms. This is called the heat finder algorithm. For Dune, you see a factor of 2 speed up from vectorization, and again, great speed up from multi-threading. So the graph neural network also can be used for Dune, and we can do tracking and particle identification. You see here, this is neutrino interaction. You can build a graph out of, so you don't see the different points because of the resolution, but so every single point here is connected as a graph. And difference is now we have a multi-headed classification, so we are trying to identify the different type of particles in the graph, and so that's the confusion matrix between the different classes of particles. And this is the project that Kaushal and Nikita, our CDAC students, are working on. So I'll just stop here so that they will, when they report, they will be able to give you more information and show the great progress they've been doing. So hopefully I'm not too late. So the conclusion is that our Fermilab and HP experiments investigate fundamental questions about the universe, and they're always hungry for more and more data. These give us challenges for to deal with this data, and so we need to do computing R&D to address these issues. And I think this is very fun, and it's fun because of the technologies we use, and it's fun because it's at the crossroads of different science, so the fundamental and physics science, computing and data science. Thank you. And yeah, I forgot to say, so you can reach me on the CDAC Slack with my last name as username, or by email, again, my last name at fnal.gov. Thank you. Maybe I'll stop sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, mille grazie, Giuseppe, for this talk. We are over time, so I want to check with Giuseppe and Katrin if you have a minute for maybe one question, so we at least have one bit of proof for Q&A. Wonderful, thank you so much both. So it looks like there's some Q&A already going in the chat. As a reminder, you can turn videos on now because this is the person-to-person part. But I want to open it up if anyone has questions for our speakers. You can unmute or raise your hand. Jamobi, go ahead.
Okay, I had one question for Giuseppe, and that was, between the detector and the trigger, how do you determine what is interesting and should be kept? Like,
yeah,
I know that you
thanks.
said it was new things.
Yes, that's a great question. It's very important that we keep the most interesting collisions to study them, and there are different criteria, and typically we get, depending on models for the physics we're looking for, there are different signatures. The very basic criterion is energy. So this is high energy physics. So anything that is high energy is interesting because it's something that is more unexplored, because it's so each experiment goes into a higher energy range. We are trying to find what is going on at higher energies. So when you see something that is very high energy, we typically keep it, but there are many more signatures that these new particles we look for can have that are even more subtle. So some are maybe detached, so you you have a track that starts not from the collision point, but start later on, or it has some other properties. And if you're able to develop your detectors to be sensitive to these features that might be rare, then you can have a first step decision from the hardware, and then an online data processing that identifies and confirms this. And in this way, you make the trigger decision to keep that event. So I hope I gave you just first direction into how to develop your question. We can follow up. I'm happy to follow up later.
Thank you.
Great. Maybe we have time for one more question.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry, but this was really interesting.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so one more question for Katrin. You spent a lot of time talking about the supercomputers and how that changed or went along with what you were doing. What about the near future? Like, what advances in supercomputing? I mean, there are going to be advances in supercomputing. How is that going to affect your work in the near future?
So the near future is actually, so hopefully next year at Argonne and Oak Ridge, we will have the first exascale supercomputers. And so they will be GPU accelerated. So that's really nice, because that's really something that we are well prepared for. Going beyond that, it's a good question. So there are different architectures around already. Also in Japan, for example, you have the ARM architecture from Fugaku. Again, that is more closely connected to the Mira multi-core approach. But so right now, I think if you're preparing for GPUs, you are on a good road. So that is right now in the near future, the main thing to look out for.
Thank you. And thank you for answering my previous question before in the chat.
Oh, sure.
All right. Well, I want to be respectful of our speakers' times today, but please join me in giving just a huge virtual round of applause to Giuseppe and Katrin for joining us. Their emails are in the chat. And so, they both offered to reach out. So I encourage folks to take them up on that. This is an incredible generosity on their part. So if you have other questions that you didn't get a chance to ask now, feel free to send them an email or a Slack message. But thank you so much, Giuseppe and Katrin. This was incredibly special. And I think now we'll transition over to hearing about education opportunities at Argonne. So if this piqued your interest and you want to hear about ways to engage, stick around.
Thanks all for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. I have to leave.